Good evening. I'd like to call this December 9th, 2024 School Board Work Session to order. The time is now 5:30 p.m. The school board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Ms. Poland, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Burgess,
I am here.
Miss Carol Hubbard, Miss Carol Hubbard, I just unmuted you.
Thank you. Here. Thank you.
Mr. Doran,
Here.
Miss Julian,
Here.
Miss Maple, Mrs. Hardy,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett.
Here.
Thank you.
Tonight's agenda is contracting custodial services. Superintendent Dr. Luke Miner and Andy DeGraw, Chief Operations Officer, will continue discussion on the option of contracting out the district's custodial services. ABM representatives will give an overview profile of what contracting looks like from a contractor's view with questions and answers from the board. UAF Facility Services Director of Maintenance and Operations, Nathan Platt, will present a report on the experience UAF has with contracting custodial services, and Colonel Jason Cole, Post Representative, will provide a look at custodial services at a military installation point of view. And with that, Dr. Miner, I will turn the meeting over to you in administration.
All right, thank you, President Burnett, and thank you to the guests for being here this evening. We do have two board members on Zoom, so wanted the table to be aware of the voices that were coming through. Those are board members, and we'll do our best to ensure that they can participate in the conversations and ask questions. So just bear with us. Sometimes it gets a little clunky when we have Zoom participants, but Ms. Poland will let us know if they have questions as we go along. We'll start with Mr. DeGraw. He has an overview of some of the questions that were asked at the last work session. So happy to go over that information and then answer any additional questions that board members may have. And then we'll turn the time over to our guests this evening. As Ms. Burnett said, ABM is with us to share their experiences of contracting custodial services around the country and specifically in K-12 environments. University of Alaska Fairbanks, thank you for joining us. They've contracted some of their custodial services, and so they'll be able to share their thoughts with us. And then Colonel Cole, how that looks on a military installation. So I'll turn the time over to Mr. DeGraw, and he'll get us started.
All right, thank you, Dr. Meinert. In addition to myself, we have, as far as staff is concerned, we have Jay Carrion, our Director of Facilities. We have Mark Roper, our Custodial Manager. We also have Ivory McDaniel, our HR Director, and Emily Proper, our Purchasing Director. So depending on the questions throughout the night, we might call on some of them to provide some input and answers. As Dr. Meinert mentioned, I'm just going to start by going over actually a few just parameters before we get into the conversations tonight related to ABM's role with the district as it currently stands. They are set to begin on a limited basis custodial services to the district starting the first week of January. We want to make sure that, and they're prepared to speak from depending on the questions, not specifically speak to them in an assumptive fashion that they would be our contractor going forward. The topic tonight is contracting our full custodial services, our full evening custodial services. They'll be sure to not speak in an assumptive tone that they would be a successful candidate in an RFP process. Depending on the circumstances, if we get the go-ahead from the board, administration will go through a process of selecting the best procurement method to procure those services. But just wanted to make that clear that they have what their relationship is with us at this current point in time. Again, Dr. Minert mentioned we have folks from UAF and Colonel Cole as well. Appreciative of them being here tonight. And then I just mentioned that we'll decide, it's not 100% established, the method that we will use to procure services going forward. And then just note, last week there were some specific questions about the successful proposal. Last time around, we are only, because there was not a contract awarded at the end of that RFP process, we're only allowed to state who and how much. And it was ABM, and how much, we'll get into that here in a moment. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into some of the questions, not some, all of the questions that we had documented from last week. One question was, what is the average cost of our current custodians? So across all job classes in the district, there's 3 or 4 different job classes of custodians. The average is just shy of $80,000, a little more than $79,000 each position. Next question is related to vacancy rates and the trend in recent years. So we didn't have the time to jump in and get exact vacancy rates for annual time periods. What we can provide, given the short time periods that we're working with from one meeting to the next, is in recent years, we've begun each year with between 10 and 15 custodial vacancies. We know that the annual number of vacancies is more than that. That's just what we had at the beginning of each school year. So as far as total annual, I would estimate a little bit higher than that. This year, we specifically had 30, so that trend increased significantly this most recent school year at the beginning. And to date, we still have 10, 11, 12 vacancies, 11 vacancies, and 2 day custodian vacancies. 3. Okay. 2, almost 1. Okay. All right, 2 and moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Well, we're on this slide, and if you want me to wait, I can do that.
No, if
Nope, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Dan.
questions as we go, that works.
In terms of the fact that this year we had about double our average, do we have any indication in terms of, because contracting custodial has been on for 2 years, that they're coming into this might have contributed that
One could say that. I would set it as anecdotal, an anecdotal reason. But folks could certainly argue that. We've seen what we do know is across the district, across the state, across the country, vacancy rates are increasing across the board. So the next question, what was the cost of the overall contract? So the successful proposal in last year, I bolded that, it's important, this is old news, not relevant to going forward, was approximately $4.6 million. And that was, in that RFP, it was option B, I think, and it was the district retaining day custodians and the services related to those positions. How does the district arrive at $3 million in savings? So at a high level, it's simple math. It's that $4.6 million. It's actually the cost of the district providing the staffing levels that we're currently budgeting for, and less the estimated cost of the custodial contract. So the difference in those numbers is the estimated savings. Last year, we published $2.6 million. That was mainly direct cost savings. It didn't include other indirect cost savings that we'll talk about here in a minute.
Ms. Maple?
That information that was presented to us during last year's budget session, did that come from a cost analysis that happened at that time?
Yeah, yes. And we would go through that same process, and it might be the same number, it might be a very different number. The $3 million number that I quoted, estimate, subject to change, that we published last week included indirect savings that we'll talk about that were not included in last year's number. It's also important to note that this is not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. So on paper, this is the district providing a lower level of service for that higher cost than what the vendors are telling us they can provide. So higher level of service for a lower cost when compared to a higher cost and lower level of service that the district is able to provide. I hope I didn't lose everybody there. These services that the district is providing at this point in time is significantly lower. And we talked about scope last week. Scope was huge, and we spent weeks and weeks and weeks establishing scope. And that scope is what we historically provided, what we would ideally provide to a school setting nightly, daily, weekly, monthly, annual exercises. It's important to note the district is not providing that level of service right now. We're not vacuuming on a daily basis. We're not cleaning on a daily basis. We're not emptying trash on a daily basis. There's many, many, many duties that we are not able to cover that we are asking school staff to complete. And oftentimes, no fault to that school staff, they have other jobs, needless to say. So very important to note that the service levels district, what the cost of the district provided and the cost of what vendors are telling us they can provide are very different levels of service.
Mr. Dorn?
And I know you have a couple more slides, but simple math. 4.6 million was the dollar amount of what we put out last year.
Yeah.
Savings 3 million, that means that we are now spending 7.6 million for custodial services.
It's actually higher than that, Mr. Dorn, because what's also calculated in there is the cost of us retaining our day custodians. So it's actually higher than that 7.6 that you mentioned. It's up in the $9+ million range. But the district is.
Okay, follow.
Follow up.
But we are projecting at this point, what our discussion is keeping the day custodians, so that is not a factor
Yes.
in staying in the same bucket. What is costing us for the rest of the custodial is 7.6.
Correct. Yes.
And I'll leave it there for now. I will probably be back with, I'm looking for a little more detail, how this number came
Okay.
about.
Okay. How does the district save money contracting out custodial? So I referenced this a little bit earlier. There's a couple of different categories of cost savings, direct cost savings. An example of that would be benefits. The district's current benefit rate for our support staff is approximately 63%. That when we compare benefit rates in other organizations, that 63% is a very, very high number. So every dollar of salary that we pay out, the district pays out 63 cents in additional benefits. Indirect cost savings, I mentioned this last week, workers' compensation. The district incurs hundreds of thousands of dollars annually in workers' comp costs related specifically to our facilities department. Contractors also have better pricing leverage with vendors when it relates to equipment and consumables, significant discounts that they can get compared to the school district. And then also this last bullet is, this is their bread and butter, this is their wheelhouse. So systems and processes that they've perfected over a long period of time are far greater than what the district could achieve. How is their price so competitive? This was a statement we received from ABM, so I'm going to kind of punt, and I'm sure they're going to cover this in their presentation tonight. Have the wages kept up with inflation since 2010? So
Mr. DeGraw, we have a question real quick from Ms. Julian before we get too far ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Julian.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeGraw. Even though you punted on the last one, I'm going to go back to that ABM. How is their price so competitive? Right now at that slide, the very last sentence talks about how they help school districts that choose to outsource achieve average savings of 15% to 18%. However, when we look at a $3 million savings to our overall facilities custodial, we're looking at a 37% savings. and we're looking at doing a level of service that we had in 2010. I don't understand that math. That's hard to wrap my head around.
So we'll let them answer this. I'm going to make a educated guess that that 15 to 18% is an average number. And I would venture to guess that they have some organizations that it's a significantly higher rate, a lower rate, and that the average is in that range. So
Just to follow up, it's a heck of a gap to reach from 15 to 18% average savings to 37% savings for us, plus better quality service.
yeah. Yeah, and just to follow up on the slide I went to, I can't really overstate how high of a number that 63% is. It's a huge number. Pick your synonym to your descriptor of that 63% number. That's a very, very, very large number. So ultimately, we know how much the district has budgeted for our custodial services. We're very familiar with that number. Contractors are very familiar with receiving a scope of work and knowing what it's going to cost them to provide those services. In the end, contractors are telling us this is how much it's going to cost us to provide this service, an elevated service to what you're providing now. And we know exactly what we're spending. In the end, at a high level, it's relatively simple math. So, but yes, these are large savings numbers that we're seeing. And I will say, there has been a significant narrative in the public that the savings just aren't there. And in my professional opinion, that's false. It's false.
Mr. Dorn?
So just so we understand that one with the slide, but with the other bullets on there, this is our information.
That one?
Yes.
This?
No, the one, have wages kept up with inflation?
Oh,
That one.
what I'm getting to?
Yeah, you start it, yeah, and you start it. And that's
Yes.
our numbers, at our average salary since then.
Yes, the first three lines are district numbers. And the last line is a statewide number provided by the Department of Labor at the state.
But not since 2010, because this is on a year basis, this is on an annual basis.
Average annual numbers, yes. So the question was, and these are support staff increases specifically to that bargaining unit. So average annual salary schedule increase, just shy of 2%. Average step increase is right in the 2.5% range. So step increases don't get a lot of publicity. Those are increases in salary. They are raises. And so it's interesting to note that the step increase is actually larger than our salary schedule increases. Total average increase. This, to be fair, full disclosure, this would be somebody through that time period that received a step every year. If they received a step and topped out about halfway through that time period, it'd drop it to in the 3.5% range. Just so the number of different scenarios that you could look at, but average inflation over that time period just above 2%. Certainly a couple of years ago, the 8% year just gets all the publicity, and that's all we end up talking about. There's actually negative inflation years in that time period, I think 2. So, of course, those don't get publicity much.
Ms. Hardy?
So I'm not too familiar. I assume others might not be either. How would someone in a custodial position receive a step increase? Would it just be completing a year of service, or what's the?
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Mr. Dorn?
When you mentioned that during the last 14 years, there's been negative inflation on some year.
Yeah. Minimum of one. There might have been a second one.
Okay. And salary increase, there have been years where there's been 0, at least one.
Yeah, we've never had a no step year. Not in this time period. Not in this time period.
Right, but the salary increase, we've had
Yeah.
0.
I'm venturing to guess there's probably a couple of years in that time period where they were zeros. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. This was a good question, and the answer is the same that I gave last week. It's just impossible to know at this point in time and to get an actual answer to this. So additional school closures would both lower our cost that we're spending on this, to provide custodial services. It would also, in theory, lower the cost of a bid from a vendor. And so, would the savings go up or down? Impossible to tell at this point. So, but certainly both sides would decrease. Are there other Alaskan school districts that contract custodial? So we received 8 responses to that request. 2 districts of those 8 actually do contract their custodial services. 2 other districts said they were very interested in information that we achieved out of the process. And then 4 districts of the 8 do not contract custodial services. So kind of a small subset, but.
Ms.
some.
Hardy?
Are those districts of comparable size or a lot smaller rural districts?
So none of the other, the ones that do contract custodial were, I'd say, medium-sized districts. So of the big 5, none of them currently are contracted.
That's yours.
One of the big 5 was interested in information that related to our process and us going through that process.
Mr. Dorn?
Thank you for the information on the big 5. It has been mentioned, I don't know whether it's accurate or not, and we mentioned it last time, if we could check Matsu, what has been mentioned as one who had contracted, no longer contracts. What feedback do we have from them?
Yeah, so
Correct.
that is correct. I think.
So I'll
It's,
hop in. It is correct. The information that we have from Matsu is not publicly shareable, from district administration, but we have made contact with them, and currently they are not contracting custodial services.
Thank you.
All right, so these last couple of slides, we're going to pivot into just kind of a quick refresher on our budget situation. And this gives information into, why the district is looking at contracting custodial. It's a unsavory topic. We get that. I talked about this last week. It's very emotional. We don't enjoy the process. At the same time, we can't ignore the financial realities that are in front of us. And so we see this as an effective way to both, at least maintain services, if not improve them, and have a positive impact on our bottom line. And so just want to provide some information to provide context as to the why. Why are we pushing this? So our initial estimated deficit is the $16 million. We've published that widely. Savings if we close 5 elementary schools, $7 million. Estimated savings if we contract custodial services, $3 million. That still leaves us with a $6 million hole to fill. And needless to say, that just the $6 million is going to be extremely challenging. What it would take to eliminate that $6 million would be approximately $1,000 BSA increase, an additional $320 beyond the $680 that we're already assuming. So it'd take $320 additional to plug that $6 million hole. This is assuming that we get a full $58 million local contribution from the borough. I think it's fair to say that's not a 100% done deal. And so there's some level of risk there. 87% of our district expenses are in salaries and benefits, in staffing. The other 13%, we've cut to the bone in that 13%. It's utilities, it's supplies, activities, contracted services. We could get nickels and dimes on a relative scale from that 13%. When we're talking structural deficits, we can't solve our structural deficits with that other 13%. So as it stands now, absent some huge, large infusion of capital, an increase in revenue. Absent that, it's virtually a certainty we're going to have to reduce positions. And so the question is which positions? And here, we get into, we hear a lot about respect and valuing employees. And I think it's fair. I speak personally, and I speak on behalf of all of administrators, that we value and respect all employees. We acknowledge the work they do. I've been in the trenches and watched custodians. I've watched teacher aides. I've watched teachers. I don't get to do it as much as I'd like to, but we see it, we value it. When we have the deficits, we have to balance our budget. And so what that forces us to do is it forces us to make choices and create priority lists. And that's, again, very distasteful. And it's not that we're devaluing somebody. It's saying, in this difficult environment that we're in, we're forced to make a decision. And so this is the least bad decision that we can make. Hopefully that makes sense. But the objective from an administrative approach, Dr. Meinert, in my conversations, we want to minimize to the greatest extent our cuts to instructional positions. So positions that are in the classrooms, directly involved in student learning. And so, as we list out the different positions around the district, everybody fills an important role. Everybody does. But there are some positions that are just closer to instruction than others, and we can't ignore that fact. So just recently, just to highlight, Dr. Miner and I decided we're probably not going to say the acronym PTR anymore. We're going to, because what increasing PTR does is it's cutting teachers. We're cutting teachers. And that's literally in the classroom instructing students. And so on a relative scale, if we increased one student in each classroom district-wide, that would save us approximately $1.7 million. We provide this information to refer back to the $6 million hole we still have, okay? And what's the impact? These are rhetorical statements here, I know, but I think it's important for us to see these things and to ponder on these things as we're considering the topic of contracting custodial. What are the impacts of reducing teaching positions? They increase class size on students. That's a challenge for staff themselves. When they have to deal with higher class sizes, that's a negative impact on everyone. Just as recent as last year, our gifted programs eliminated many of them. Elimination of instrumental music, district-wide art. These are all teaching positions, certified teaching positions that have been eliminated.
Mr. DeGraw, we have a question. Ms. Dulian, and then Mr. Dorn.
Yeah, I asked this last week, and I just want to ask this again. How many teaching positions were eliminated last year?
32.
Thank you.
Mr. Dorn?
On this slide, just for clarification, making sure that that's elementary, instrumental.
Yeah.
And I would suggest maybe we
Yeah.
put that word in for the public.
Yes.
Because I know there's lots of confusion.
That is true. We haven't touched secondary instrumental. Yeah.
Right. And I would like to go back to the slide before for clarification. The statement towards the bottom, the $1,000 BSA increase, does that include the 680 that we hope to have added to the BSA, or is it in addition to?
It includes. So it's an additional we got 680. So it'd
And
be
one
an
time.
yes,
Right.
an additional 320 beyond. So the 680
Okay,
plus
plus
another 320
Okay.
to come up with that 1,000. Yes.
I'd like to check on Zoom real quick. Mr. Burgess, did you have any questions for Mr. DeGraw?
Sure, thank you. I have a couple. I guess my first one, backing up to the, which slide was it? Slide on school closures or consolidation. If we, I guess it's a little different than what's actually on the slide, but my question is, assuming we are able to retain custodial staff in schools that are closed, how does that change the vacancies that we would currently have? And, how much closer would we be to full staffing for custodial?
So we average, depending on the size of the building, Mr. Burgess, between 3 and 4 custodial positions per building. So I want to make sure I understand your question. Was it if reducing our footprint by the number of elementaries we're looking at, would that eliminate the current vacancies that we have? Is that?
That's getting at it, yeah, or yes.
Yeah. So I mean, just doing math, yeah, we're probably looking at around 20 positions, 22 total custodial positions. 20, in the 20 range.
And so moving those staff to other schools, assuming we retain them, would that?
Yes, that would cover. So currently we're looking at about 11 vacancies district-wide. So yes, it would eliminate those vacancies, if assuming we retained all of those employees.
Any other questions,
Thanks.
Mr. Burgess?
If there's no one else in the queue, I'll go ahead and ask another.
You've only asked one. Go ahead.
Okay. So regarding savings on workers' comp, this is probably a question that we would need to go to legal for, but I wanted to just flag it that we have heard that in other places there have been lawsuits from employees working for a contractor against the district because it is, the school districts owns the place. So I'm sorry, I'm not articulating this well, probably because my sinuses are killing me, but but we have heard that despite those savings from, the contracted company having to pay workers' comp instead of the district, there is a potential that the district could get sued by an employee who is injured on the job on district property. So I wanted to flag that and ask, is that a serious concern?
Go ahead, Dr. Minor.
I think that's a good question, Mr. Burgess. And schools are risky environments, and anybody that walks into a school could have the potential of suing the school district if there was some kind of negligence. And so I think what's important to understand is that every lawsuit that's brought against an entity has individual characteristics with it. And so what I will say is that there's not any increased liability to the district because of contracting. There's certain parameters that the contractor would work very hard to provide a safe environment. We would also do the same thing. But that doesn't prevent somebody from bringing a lawsuit against the district. But what's important to remember is that there's not any increased liability to the district because of contracting itself.
And then just to add on to those comments, I would say this is a great reason of why it's beneficial for the district to retain our day custodians and to have those eyes and ears in the buildings on a daily basis. We will have established a robust, quality control process within our non-represented staff in the facilities department to where we'll have oversight on our facilities on a daily, weekly basis. And so I just think that would be another benefit of those systems, as well as having those employees in the building just to keep eyes and ears on the buildings on a daily basis.
Ms. Dulian.
Thank you. That was actually a good lead into my question. I have a question, Mr. DeGraw, about the $3 million savings. And I'm sorry I keep harping on this because it is a significant portion of of what we're trying to do when it comes to closing a deficit. And I always like to say that, or I'm just saying to myself that, yes, you're saying 16 million, but that's assuming a $4 million more reach than the borough currently can do. And so I'm thinking about it as a 16 to 20 million to draw a little bit more reality to what we're facing. However, I really, I want to ask a little bit about those day custodians. We talked about creating a new position that was a higher grade. Is that correct? Is that investment, with that investment, do we still maintain a $3 million projected savings?
So I have not, the numbers are estimates at this point, and they're based off of the savings that we saw last year. So in my estimation right now, those numbers don't change. So to answer your question, I think the question was, do I still see the answer is yes. I don't see, people have asked, well, Eielson closed, right? So our costs dropped, but in theory, we just dropped 110,000 square feet of space to be cleaned as well. So, the custodial contract we assume would fall as well. So, yes, those same estimates stand today. Again, they're estimates subject to change. And the difference from the $2.6 million last year and this year, the main difference is the equipment as well as the workers' comp savings. So,
You have a follow-up, Ms. Julian? Okay. Then I'd like to go to Zoom real quick. Ms. Carol Hubbard, do you have a question for Mr. DeGraw?
No, I'm good so far. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Dorn?
Couple of things. One, in terms of the important reminders one, suggesting we keep it as close 5 schools. We don't know whether they'll be elementary or not. I know what's been put out in terms of, but small thing, but perhaps important. Follow up to Mr. Burgess's question, and so I understand the savings pieces. We would, if 5 schools are closed, 15 to 20, does that include the day lead? Is in that number, right? Okay.
yes, that 20-ish number does include day custodians.
So that would be a savings, if we take the average, if we say 20, and we take the average salary, we're looking at 1.6 million as a savings there. Is that, I'm concerned whether we're double counting that as a savings into the 3 million as well as a savings from the school, where actually would be.
Yeah, we're not double counting it.
We're not. I asked that question early on, and the savings are reflected in the closure of the schools.
Yeah.
So we've gone through each individual school as we've done in the past and looked at duplicative positions, and those savings would be reflected in those school closures.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are not included in the 3 million. The 3 million was adjusted to make sure that those positions.
I mean, I think what's important with the 3 million, as Mr. DeGraw has said, is that it's an estimate for right now, and given we don't know what the bid will be based on whatever consolidations we may have as a school district. And so there are a couple moving pieces in place. And so once the district knows what consolidations look like and we go through a co-op or an RFP process, then we'd be able to get a lot more clearer picture of where that's going to fall. But we're very confident that it would be in that $3 million range of savings for the school district.
But to directly answer your question, we're not double counting savings.
Okay, all right. Still processing how, and we'll continue in terms of how we got to 3 million, because I'm seeing anomalies, but I have to process.
Is there any other questions from the board? Mr. Burgess?
Sure, I'll ask one more. About what percentage of um, ESSA staff are comprised by the janitors or the custodians that we would be losing here?
So there's a total general fund ESSA positions. The total is between 6 and 650. And we're talking about approximately 70, roughly a little more than 70 evening custodians. So a little more than 10%.
I think it's important to note that there's also some grant-funded ESSA positions as well, which is in the 100 to 150 range. So that percentage comes down when they're factored in as well.
Okay, we have Miss Maple, Miss Hardy, and then Miss Julian. Go ahead, Miss Maple.
My questions are actually just on like logistics of the how this meeting is going to go. I have other questions that are not specific to here that I think are probably answered by like an array of people. Should I hold those till after your presentation and then what the second?
I think it'd be great to allow our guests to get into their presentations, and then we can certainly continue to answer questions at the end of this administration. But maybe if we're going long, then we could let our guests go if we feel like we've exhausted questions from the board to them.
Questions incoming.
Did anybody have questions regarding this specific thing, or are we ready to move on? Miss Hardy, I did see your hand up.
Mine is directly to administration, but I can hold it till the end. It's fine.
Okay, then we will go ahead and move on.
And just one or two slides left. So where we left off was just talking about the intent to reduce as much as possible the cuts to instructional positions, and just drawing a contrast to, between different job classes, different positions, and how close or far they are away from the educational process, how far close they are to instruction. Another layer to consider when we're looking at this topic is it's important to note that most cuts to our budget involve a literal reduction in services to somebody, staff, students. It's important to note, and it's amplified when we make classroom cuts. When we increase class size, we cut gifted programs, we cut instrumental programs, teacher reductions, instructional staff cuts. These all involve reduction in services to students. It's important to note that the situation we're looking at here, and I know folks would dispute this, but we feel strongly about this, is this involves zero reduction or change in services to schools. It's simply a different approach or different way of providing those services. And again, we've said this before, I'll say it again. We estimate that those services, I would be shocked if they just stayed the same. I expect them to go up. And so we're acquiring significant amount of savings at the same time we're preserving and expanding the services that schools are receiving. So think about staff cuts that we'll look at, and staff cuts that we will be forced to look at to fill that $6 million gap, $9 million if we don't choose to contract custodial. I guarantee there will be direct classroom cuts to our school district, huge direct classroom cuts to our school district. And so important to remember, this significant arrow that we have in our quiver that, technically speaking, on paper, we're not reducing services. We're just doing it a different way. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. Dr. Miner, I'll turn it back over to you to introduce our guests.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We are going to turn it over to ABM. Should have asked this prior to. Do you have a presentation that you want up on the screen? I know everybody has it within their packet as well. Okay. Can here, let's do it from, can you bring up board docs and do that?
I'll bring it up. You don't have to worry about it. Start if you want, and I'll have it up here and just.
All right, to start off, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting us up to Fairbanks. We do understand that this is a very emotional and hard thing to consider, so we are very excited to have us up here and to not really show you guys how we can replace or do something better or anything, but be an extension of what you guys are currently doing. And our goal is to focus on cleaning so you guys can focus on what you do best, which is teaching. So, at ABM, we always like to start off our meetings by having a moment for safety. And today's moment of safety is always be aware of emergencies such as fires, always know where the emergency exits are, and always take the stairs when in doubt. So. We typically provide PDFs, classes, and QR codes for all of our staff during those moments. Now, as far as ABM is concerned, we have, and just to give you a little bit of insight on what we do, we like to give back to the community as well. We have an ABM impact groups. I don't know if these slides are coming up. Okay. We have ABM impact groups, which are led by voluntary team members, and such as the veterans at ABM. It's something that we enjoy, and it's something that we offer learning and development, mentorship opportunities, meaningful relationships to the communities, and virtual and in-person events to allow to give back to the communities. And I'd like to turn it over to Emily, who's going to introduce our
Okay.
Bring it right up to you. There we go.
Okay. So starting with LJ, she is the VP of Sales covering West area, and she has 7 years of experience with the K through 12 districts. And we have Tae Yoon, Alaska Operations Manager. He has 10 years of leadership experience, and he works closely with the regional and the local teams. And next is me, Emily Jiang. I'm the assistant branch manager. I work behind the scene supporting Alaska team, Alaska operations over 20 years. And then we have Myron Luckenbach. He is our senior VP of operations. He has over 35 years of experience. Then next we have the leadership team. Mark Ha and Dean Fuchs unfortunately can't join us tonight. Mark Ha is the regional director of operations, and he has been involved in custodial field in Alaska since the 80s. Dean Fuchs is the regional VP of operations, has been with ABM for over 40 years now, and he started out as a custodian himself. So today's agenda, we will first give an overview of ABM, and we will go over hard cost and soft savings. Then we will discuss this transition and the people, then wrapping up with partnership and communication. And we'll pass back to Tae Yoon to go over ABM services and experience.
So to share a little background, ABM was founded in 1909. We're in over 250 plus US and international locations, and we're currently serving over 340 K through 12 schools. Now, as you may know, we offer a variety of different services, as you can see from the slide there. But today we're just going to focus on custodial aspect of it. We have a local operations team here in Alaska. We're backed by a stable company. We've been servicing Alaska since 1984. We have a presence here in Fairbanks, over at UAF, and about 20 years now. And we have over 220 Alaskan employees. Now, I'd like to kick it off to Myron, who's going to go over the hard and soft skills.
Actually, I will. Leslie Jones, but you can call me LJ because my name's been misspelled my entire life. We're going to talk about some hard and soft savings. Some of them we've already discussed here this evening. So want to talk about initially some of the items that aren't necessarily considered. This was done through a third-party research team and talking about just some soft costs, right? So thinking about the time spent recruiting, which was something that was mentioned already this evening. But one of the items that people don't realize with kind of the outsourcing of cleanliness of the schools and defining that level of cleanliness is a third of the schools see an immediate improvement in air quality. And that cleaner air, as we all have learned through COVID, whether we wanted to learn it or not, is a cleaner environment means that you get sick less and the students are in school more, right? So it actually has quite an effect on the attendance records. We also found during our research that 1 in 5 leave each year or take time off each year due to stress. And that stress can be because equipment is down or because of poor working conditions. And so it not only helps the students' attendance rates, but it also helps the attendance of the employees themselves. So just a nice little overview for you of some of the soft cost savings that weren't discussed. Going on to some of the additional harder cost savings, right? We talked about the 15 to 18% annual budget savings. To Mr. DeGraw's point earlier, that is our research, and that is specific to the West region that Myron and I oversee. So that's not a national, that is what we directly work with and have experienced. Workers' comp, which was already mentioned, so I won't go through that. But one of the items that I thought was really interesting is the hours of recruiting that it saves your HR team. And I'm so glad that they're here this evening. So it's not that we do it different. It's not that we are saying we do recruiting better. It's that we're a national company, and so we just have more people to support the recruiting efforts. So the recruiting hours, and then once you do recruit, all of the time that goes into training those employees, right? So here's a lot of uncaptured costs that go into the decision when you're outsourcing. One of the items that we wanted to make sure that we discussed this evening is the transition of people, right? That's the primary concern. You know these folks, they've been in your schools for years. And so Myron's going to cover from his plethora of experience. He's been with the company over 35 years, started as a custodian himself and worked his way up to SVP. So we wanted Myron to really talk about that transition of the staff because this is such a vital part, right? Making sure that the staff knows that they're going to be taken care of.
Thank you for your time tonight. The transition is usually something that everybody's really concerned about, right? And you know, at the end of the day, ABM or anybody else that's in our space, we're a big HR firm is what we are. You know, so we're all about the people. And then, you know, the byproduct of that could be cleaning a toilet, mowing grass, et cetera. So it's all focused around the people. But the transition, how do we go from an in-house program to an outsourced program? The transition actually started when we got the previous scope of work. You know, so we start formulating how we would come into the district and, you know, start that. And so, you know, that's where our initial, you know, feedback to the district came from. So we've already started that plan. You know, all we can know is what we know, right? And then we learn as we go. This is my second time up here, Leslie's third. You know, Dean and Mark have been up here. Tag's working with y'all now on the 3 facilities. So we learn every morning. We just start tweaking it, but you got to have a plan so you can tweak it. So the transition's really, in our mind, already started because we got the blueprint for it, but we know it's not finished. And then, you know, we're preparing. And then if y'all decide to outsource and there's another event, we just fine tune that. So whenever, if we were fortunate enough to be awarded, we just start our plan and we start running with it from day one. Okay. Day one being the day we're awarded, if that's 30 days before start or 60 days or 90 days, whatever that date happens to be. Again, the people and the equipment are the two biggest things that take lead time. In y'all's case, when you have an in-house conversion, we're figuring about 80% of those people will come over to us. Our desire is to have 100%. Anybody that wants to come and can pass the background is willing to come at their current pay rate. Okay, we will not cut any of the existing people pay rates when we bring them over. So that helps us a lot, really, on an in-house conversion, say, versus if we were taking over from another contractor. So we would want to, as soon as we can, from when there's an official announcement, I'm saying, when I say as soon as we can, I'm saying 24, 48, no more than 72 hours, be here to hold a town hall with the team, your current team, and let them know that, you know, I've already read that some of the things that are out there. I've watched a lot of video of y'all. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not accurate, and it seems like to me it's a perception that they don't have jobs. They all have jobs if they want to be here, okay? And we'll try to put that fear down, and then we start moving forward after that meeting with onboarding them, getting their background checks done, because we're going to do a background checks, and y'all have y'all's process on top of that. Nobody's getting in these schools that's not cleared to be in the schools. Okay. I have kids, I have grandkids, I have all of that. I don't want anybody in either. I actually have school districts that don't require fingerprinting, but ABM does, even when they don't require it. So we get all of that going, we get it going forward, and then that's just before we even start day one. All of that has to do. The other thing I want to point out that is really on that graph is we have subject matter experts in every area that work with their counterpart with y'all. Our billing will work with y'all's AP. Our IT will work with your IT for firewall issues and things like that. You don't want me talking IT. I can spell those two letters, but that's about it. You know, so we're going to put those experts where they need to be, so when we start day one, we're ready to go. Okay. My job, Tay's job, Dean, Mark, everybody else we have talked about, our whole job is to support the people in the field. I started there. I understand that's where the rubber hits the road. So we're all focused on the people. So there's a lot of training up front. And once we get in here, the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what do we do after we get them here, after we're already going. And granted, I left a lot of steps out to get this thing off the ground, but the biggest one's the people and the equipment. The rest of it's pretty simple. But retaining employees has become very, very big, I would say, in the last 10 years. We don't have excessive amount of people out there. So how we train them, what we do for them, and all of that is paramount. And it's everything from just saying thank you at night. When I come out to the districts, I make sure I hit the night people. Everybody knows the day custodians. Not everybody knows the night people. And they do a heavy lift. So it's that. We recognize them on their birthdays. We have one full week in May that for 5 straight days we do something different for the custodians. And that's across all of ABM. All over 100,000 people of ours, we touch them. So, and then the biggest thing to retain them is showing them the upward mobility, you know, within us. Your in-house program only has so many positions within the in-house program. We show them a career where they can move rather than just a job. You know, all of that, we start investing in them. We'll talk a little bit about our training programs and things like that. But retaining them, we got to get them in here first. Then we train them, and then we retain them. Consistent people is consistent service. So it also costs us more to go chase them down and hire them than it does to retain them. So we really focus on that. And the last piece is, and LJ already hit on it a little bit earlier, is our talent acquisition team. That is a complete department by itself. It's not HR. It's completely separate. All it does is recruit and hire people. Okay, so once they're gone through, they've accepted the offer, talent acquisition is through with them and it moves over to HR. But, and it's a very big group of men and women that are in that department. So we use social media, we use boots on the ground, we get involved in the community, we work with the workforce commissions, we work with Catholic charities or people like that, you know, to see where we can find the labor at. Okay. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jay.
As Myron mentioned earlier about upward mobility, one of the things that I feel a lot of the employees join ABM is for that reason alone, the opportunity to advance within a company. I know when you're advertised custodian, some people don't see any way to move up, but you know, we have great shining examples of people moving up. We have local individuals such as Richard Ward, who was a night shift cleaner working over at UAF. And as he was working there, he showed his experience with the campus and was quickly promoted to supervisor. And after a while, we've noticed that his experience is very valuable. So we took the effort to train and invested assets into him, and then was able to promote him to project manager over at UAF. So that's one of the stories that we have. And then we also have Shane. He started as a custodian over in Idaho, and it was a very interesting situation because that was another district that was considering outsourcing. And at that time, Shane was actually very vocal. He was recorded on multiple media outlets for being against outsourcing. And once he was hired, he actually enjoyed working with ABM and continued to grow within ABM, and now is an area manager with over 5 accounts over in Idaho currently. So those are just some of the things that we try to inspire in all of our employees to be able to move up within the company as well. So, as far as some of the resources that we use to encourage upward mobility is team member training. We have over 400 courses available to all of our employees. We have things from janitorial basics 101 to you know, field leader essentials, which is basically a management program that allows you to learn the different skills to move up as a manager within the company as well. So with this, we have ABMU, which is a great resource, and that's just some of the tools that we have for all of our employees to continually learn and grow. As far as managing staff, we believe that communication is key. And with that said, we want to be an extension of this district as well. And we want to consistently be, have a point of contact where you guys can communicate with us and we can communicate with you. And that way you guys are always in the know of what's going on day or night. We also have new employee orientation and training. We want to ensure that we work with you. Since you guys have a good system already, we want to implement our system with your system, intertwine, to really enhance that area to train and have very efficient employees. And also accountability. We have annual reviews for all of our employees to ensure that their performance matches up to standards, but also that's our opportunity to see what upward mobility possibilities there are for them as well. And then our goal is to really help you guys by focusing on the custodial side for you guys, so that way you guys can once again focus on what you do best, which is teaching. that, I'd like to hand it over to LJ.
I'm going to wrap things up talking about communication, which is one of my favorite topics. Number one, because I like to talk a lot. And number two, because I think ABM has a great program of initiating communication, where sometimes when you're outsourcing, there can feel like a lack of information or control. And so ABM has multiple items in place to make sure that we're initiating the conversation with regular meetings. So I'll take you through what some of those regular meetings are. The first one is daily or weekly, depending on the school district's request, and that is with our project manager that we would hire. The project manager is hired to oversee kind of the general overview of the RFP and scope of work. However, the administration is invited to those interviews and to approve that person as well, because we want to make sure that they not only match the experience, but they also match Fairbanks culturally, and make sure that they're a good fit with your staff. That is the regular daily point of contact, right? So from there, then we also have a monthly meeting, and that is our customer business review group. So you're going to have Mark Ha, who is our regional and local to Alaska, as well as with Tay and Emily. And again, to go over any issues, any grievances, anything that needs escalated, as well as before and after photos of projects that were requested. So if there was a special need for pressure washing or something of that sort, before and after photos showing that they were done, making sure that they met expectations. And then we have our quarterly business reviews, and I'll go to that on the next slide. Our CBRs, or client business review, is really where the Fairbanks administration team and our executive team sit down and talk about, again, any issues, grievances, a mismatch in expectations, as well as recognizing the employee of the month. If there's an ABM Cares, which we haven't talked about, but that's where everyone gets a day off to go volunteer at a nonprofit. And so we just kind of highlight those items of what's going on in the district as well. From our perspective, it's a great time to make sure that our expectations are aligned as well. So those meetings are really key to our success. And again, as Myron had mentioned, as part of the transition process, those are set for the year at award date to say, okay, great, let's start talking about when these meetings are going to happen, get them on the calendar, because we want to make sure that it's not an afterthought. This has to be part of our initial discussions. We use a program called SITE as part of our communication as well. And I highlight SITE because, you know, as we talk to different school districts and we talk to different people, everyone has a different definition of what's clean, right? So a scope of work may say, clean the baseboards. But my version of clean is different than his version of clean and different than her version of clean. And so SITE is a great way where we do joint inspections. The district can set one or multiple people who can do a site inspection and say, okay, this was cleaned or this was missed. ABM also inspects the same area, and then either in the monthly or the quarterly meetings, we sit down and say, okay, we marked it satisfactory, you marked it unsatisfactory, where's the disconnect and what's missing? So again, it's a way to communicate when there is a mismatch in expectations. Mr. DeGraw has talked a few times about the thorough scope of work, and I need to tell you, as someone who fields this, the scope of work in your RFP was the most thorough I've ever worked with. It was wonderful, so your procurement team did a great job. But there can still be different levels of expectation from what's written on paper. And this is where we capture that data to say, you thought it wasn't good, we thought it was good. We need to get on the same page of what that looks like to make sure that the quality of work is always being achieved. So that's where that communication comes from, and then how we discuss it is in those monthly and quarterly meetings. The last two items that we have to discuss about communication is surveys for your team. So the first one is a client satisfaction survey. This goes out regularly to where one or multiple people from the administration can take a web-based survey. And again, it tracking feedback of satisfaction levels and expectations if they were met in the service side. Not only do we get that, meaning your local team, not only does our executive team get that, but these results go to the CEO. So When we're looking at, a larger company, Fortune 500 publicly traded, the one thing we don't want is the CEO to get negative reviews from our client satisfaction survey, right? So this is a great way for us to make sure, again, that your team is happy with the results and the cleanliness in the classrooms. And the last item is one of my favorites. It's our principal report cards. So these go out monthly, and it's a great way for the principals to have direct communication with us. I want to make sure that not only is your administration included in these conversations about satisfaction and cleanliness, but the principals who are there every day, who's getting that immediate feedback from the teachers if there's issues or items that were left remaining from the night before, they have a way to communicate that. And so this is the way for us to preemptively address issues. If we're getting feedback from one school location that's unhappy versus one that is happy, we need to address those differences. Our goal as a company that would be servicing the district at night is to make sure that each location is receiving the same level of service. And when I say level, I'm talking about the satisfaction level, the cleanliness level of what those definitions are, and through the joint inspections and the principal report card, that's how we really get that communication. It gives them a voice in this outsourcing process. We will pause there and take any questions or feedback.
So before we move on to questions, I would like to give UAF and Colonel Cole a chance to speak to their experiences and such. So if the board could please hold their questions, we will turn it over to Mr. Platt.
Right. Thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. My name is Nathan Platt. I'm the Director of Maintenance and Operations with Facility Services at the university. Been at UAF professionally for almost 25 years, and most of those years in facilities management roles. I'm joined tonight by Vanessa Hastings. She's our custodial program manager and undoubtedly an expert in not only our custodial program, but custodial work in general. So if there's anything I can't answer for you, rest assured that Vanessa can. 20 years ago, UAF was where you are now, where we were looking for ways to cut costs, and custodial service was something that was looked at. And we went through all the same exercises, the same emotions. We had in-house custodial service in all of our buildings, and we made the decision to contract it out to save money. That was in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was phased out. In-house was phased out. Contract was phased in, and we've worked with ABM for close to 20 years on that. And I've worked with ABM personally for close to 20 years. ABM is one of the 3 contractors that the university uses. The other 2 are Clean and Serene. They clean the residential areas of campus, the dormitories and apartment complexes. And then we have a small custodial contractor called Miranda's that cleans some of our off-campus buildings, like the hangar at the airport, UAF's hangar on the East Ramp, the Harper building, and our offices and classrooms at the Pipeline Training Center. There is cost savings. There's no doubt about it when we use contractor. Not really prepared to get into the specific numbers here, but I'd be happy to answer any general questions about the cost savings. We realized when UAF decided to contract out, we weren't looking for an apples-to-apples service. We made the unfortunate decision, kind of the uncomfortable decision, to reduce services in our buildings. So, you've talked about trying to maintain or even improve on services. Just an example of what we did is we reduced the number of times per month that offices were cleaned, faculty, staff offices, from almost daily to right now we're down to twice a month for cleaning some of those areas. So, we've reduced service further. Let's see. We have 3, in addition to Vanessa, we have 3 full-time facilities inspectors whose responsibility is to go around and, ensure that ABM and our 2 other contractors are doing what we're paying them to do. And we have a feedback mechanism that we use every day to make sure that communication lines are open, and that's worked very well for us. We use different standards than the school district would use. We use APPA. APPA is a professional organization that the university belongs to. APPA cleaning standards, and those are available online, but they're very similar to the ISSA standards that Emily, you told me about. Some of the considerations you've talked about, the university, of course, came to the same conclusions, that having ABM responsible for hiring, training employees was cost saving to us. Equipment and supplies. We used to stock, of course, all the paper products, cleaning products through our facilities warehouse, and of course that responsibility was transferred to the custodial contractor, and there was a savings for us there. That's pretty much it for me. I'd be, of course, delighted to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Platt. And then we'll go to Colonel Cole, and then we'll go to the board.
Colonel Cole and guest. So I'm Colonel Cole, the garrison commander at Fort Wainwright, and I brought my city manager, aka my deputy, Mr. Richard Fromm, just because how the Army does contracts and as well as our workforce, which is really what we're talking about, is a little bit different. So for some of the reasons Mr. DeGraw has talked about for cost of having employees, DOD is limited by the number of civilian employees the DOD can have across all of DOD by Congress. And so when there is a new increase, a new force, a new command, DOD doesn't see an increase, an authorization increase for federal employees by Congress, so they have to find people that are already authorized by Congress. So years ago, the Army basically said, hey, you have this requirement for custodial or janitorial, but I need to take people away because you no longer authorize these people. We still have the requirement to have clean facilities. So that's generally, largely why we have gone to a contract for custodial. But for some of the same reasons Mr. Graw has already talked about, pay and benefits and retirements and everything, that's kind of why we've gone to janitorial. There are some benefits, there are some challenges with custodial contracts. Our custodial, if you take a look at our contract, largely reads as janitorial. And really it's a custodial contract mainly because they do replenish some supplies and they take out trash. But for small facility maintenance things like repainting or a hole in the wall or anything like that, that goes responsibility to, we'll just say like a building manager or facility manager. Someone who works in that building, they're the go-to person to identify if there's a hole in the wall or there's paint chipping, and they'll put in a work order for another contractor that we have that does facilities maintenance. So I'll turn it over for Rich. He has many years experience doing this at many different locations. If he's got any TTPs that he wants to share.
No, I'll just say, as Colonel Cole said, the Army went to this as a cost-saving measure years ago, and there's been, I've been at several different installations. There's been trials and tribulations as we cycle through different contractors, and we have tons of lessons learned. The biggest one is getting your scope right to begin with, right? We have learned through the years that, when we first started writing scopes were based on, hey, we need this facility cleaned. Well, our facility wasn't accurate how many square feet were actually in the system. So we're actually paying for a lot more square footage than they were actually cleaning. And there's areas in buildings that aren't cleaned, mechanical rooms and other things that were included in the square foot of the buildings. We have since looked at all that and make sure what we're actually paying for square footage is actually what needs to be cleaned. And the other thing I'll tell you is that, our scope varies based on facility. I have everything on the installation from admin offices to physical fitness centers to childcare centers. They all have different standards and different cleaning that have to take place, and making sure that it's correct in the scope. The other thing is, we use what we call contract officer representatives, which are essentially like UAF uses, monitors, right? I have monitors that go out behind the contractors to make sure they're doing exactly what they need to do. And, our contracts are all within the federal acquisition regulation. So we have different mechanisms in the FAR that are written into our contracts to make sure that, the contractors are doing their standards of what we paid them to do. But happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight and for your presentations and for your information. And with that, we will turn it over to the board. And I see Ms. Hardy's hand up, so Mrs. Hardy.
This one is for our post representatives. Thank you so much for coming. I had a question. How does the Davis-Bacon Act requirements relate to your outsourcing of custodial? Because it's very different than what we're facing.
So yes, so when we write the scope, we send it over to our contracting team, and we have to comply with Davis-Bacon, but by the FAR. We leave it up to our contracting team, and we give what we call an independent government cost estimate on what we think it's going to cost, and then it's up to our contracting team to contract it and negotiate with the contractors but we have to comply with Davis-Bacon wages.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, ma'am.
So with that, and in case people don't know what Davis-Bacon is, it's a federal law that requires you to pay the prevailing wage as well as benefits. What exactly does that look like for Alaska for that type of work?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. Right, it's like I said, that is some of my technical experts down in DPW that actually write the scopes and figure out the indirect cost estimates. We can probably get you a figure on what that looks like. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I can tell you that we have to comply because it's a federal law, and so whatever it is, we comply with and move forward. But that said, we still save significant money in benefits by contracting out custodial.
Miss Maple and then Miss Julian.
So I think my question is for the ABM team. I think that when I remember hearing it last year and asking a question about it, and then hearing from the public that it's how do you presume to be able to maintain the pay rates that are custodians that would come over to ABM? I mean, like just looking at, what positions you have advertised in the community right now, they seem to be on average lower than what we're paying at the district. And well, I'll start there. Then I have like 2 follow-ups.
I made that statement and I made it, and it's 100% accurate. I will match everything that they make because I want that industry knowledge. What I have to do is, when I say what we'll have to do is find efficiencies to offset some of that if we need to. But that's what I'm saying for the existing staff that's here now. We're not going to be bringing in new people at that same rate.
Okay, can I follow up? Do you, based off, I know that there was one RFP, it's no longer, but in the initial bid, do you have an idea of how many full-time versus part-time we'd be talking about?
Our current bid is that we put it back over a year ago now, I think, was 100% full-time personnel. What we've been forced to do, and I'm not against part-timers either, but we're going to take what the workforce gives us. We're going to go try to get all full-time, and if we can't get them, then we'll start supplementing them with part-time. The other reason we'll bring in part-time is you can't hire part of a person. So if we figure that school needs 2.5 people, we need that half-time there in that school. If there's another school close enough to it, then we can use a full-time person. But if we start rounding up everything, that's how we get overstaffed.
Can I add to that? I'm sorry, Ms. Maple. I just wanted to clarify that the RFP that we bid last year also had 2 different scopes. There was an A and a B. So there might be some differences in the staffing number that you're looking for, just because there was 2 different. One in I think it was snow removal was a difference. There was a couple of differences in scopes. So the staffing may be different. So we don't have an exact number for you based on that as well. But as Myron said, looking to transition folks, we would want to transition everyone over who currently has a full-time or part-time position.
Okay.
Okay, that's helpful. So my last piece to that then, just for clarification. So in of course, a new bid can be different, but in the bids that we're talking about, or that we have to have for some context rather, predominantly it's full-time positions. So that's in this cost savings or in this bid that you put forward, the cost savings that it would show that we would have, that is including predominantly staff that you're budgeting in benefits for.
That's
Health,
correct.
specifically health insurance.
That's correct.
Okay, I'll stop for now. Thank you.
Ms. Julian, then we have Mr. Burgess, and then Mrs. Hardy.
Okay, thank you. My question's for ABM. I'm just want to clarify in your benefits program. I'm looking at the what you've put out there for recruitments here locally and looked at the benefits. It doesn't look like you offer sick pay. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you're looking at.
I'm just looking at your ABM 2024 benefits program for frontline team members off of which is linked directly to a job posting for a school custodian, Eielson Air Force Base. I just want to check and see if somebody's sick, do they have sick leave?
Yeah, I think what you're referencing is the current supplemental, which is different from the RFP that we responded to last year.
Yeah, I'm not looking at the RFP. Yeah. So do you have sick pay? If somebody's sick, do they get paid?
It's not in that one currently because it's a 6-month contract. So we, you know, we upped the wages a little bit on it, and it's not in there now currently.
Okay. Okay. And then I have a follow-up, but
Follow-up.
okay. My follow-up is we right now have within our district, we're looking at the beginning of the year, we had about a 30% vacancy rate. Right now, we're currently at an 8% vacancy rate. And I understand economies of scale when it comes to building a contractor. And you said that you have about 220 employees here in Alaska. How many of those are in Fairbanks? And I'm just curious as to looking at similar markets that you're in. I mean, we're not a metropolitan market where you're going to draw from people that are living 30-minute commute out of town. We are, in a sense, an island. So how is it that in Fairbanks you can overcome the staffing challenges that we all locally experience?
I'll let Tabe in a second talk to you about how it breaks down the 220 people. But I'll tell you something that's very similar to what from everything I know here is Flagstaff, Arizona. You know, Flagstaff, Arizona is very isolated. We have people driving 45 minutes plus through the snow, you know, to get there. We're recruiting into places that are off the grid, you know, and we're able to staff that. That's the closest I can tell you to that we are currently operating in, similar to this environment.
Mr. DeGraw?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood the response to Ms. Julian's question about the lack of health insurance. That is for a short-term temporary contract and a very different situation than what the company would provide under an ongoing contract.
I just want to clarify, Mr. DeGraw.
Yeah.
I was asking more about a sick pay. So sick leave when somebody calls in sick.
Correct. And the listing that you're looking at, Ms. Julian, is for a temporary contract
Okay.
to plug a gap that we have right now with those 11 vacancies
Sure. Okay.
at 3 different locations. Very different situation than an ongoing, regular, permanent contract through outsourcing our entire services to a vendor.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Very different.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Mr. Burgess?
Thank you. I have similar questions to some of the other members, and I'm not sure that I heard a clear answer about how equivalent the benefits that custodial contractors would offer compared to what the current custodial staff are getting. So I'm thinking healthcare, retirement benefits, things like that. Are they going to be on par
The information in the RFP that we responded to did not have the details of the benefits. So we have our benefits program that's included, but I can't speak to if they are quote on par, as I don't know exactly what's currently being offered. That would need to be discussed.
Mr. Burgess, do you have a
Okay.
follow-up?
I do. Along the it's along the same vein anyway, not exactly a follow-up, but when we're talking about existing staff transitioning to ABM or another contractor, we're hearing that it's likely that they would get the same pay. Would they also be able to expect the same kinds of step increases for time and service?
Again, we're not clear what that step increase is. First time I've seen step increase was in this meeting on the slide, so we're not even familiar with what that is.
Okay, Mrs. Hardy.
One
Oh,
more
sorry.
follow-up,
Go ahead, Mr. Burgess. Go ahead.
Just on the question of full-time staff, does full-time mean 40 hours a week for 12 months a year?
Yes, it's based on 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Yes, sir.
And 12 months?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hardy.
Hi, thank you for being here. Just so that you know the information, a step increase is just like a yearly raise, how much their salary goes up the next year. So my question, kind of along the same veins, but maybe one that you could give a more specific answer to. In your current contracts here in Fairbanks, does ABM offer their full-time employees sick leave, personal leave, maternal or paternal leave?
Yes. Just quick, can I ask one more? Can I ask a question back to that earlier statement about the step? So, because I saw a step and then I saw an annual increase. Are they the same or are they separate?
Those are two different types of salary increases. Step increases are typically educational and government entities, and certainly not common in the private sector.
Mr. Dorn.
Did you want to go to
I
Laura
have
and then-
I have already checked in with her. She's okay right now.
Okay, great. Question on, and I appreciate both UAF and the Post being available here. Both very different settings, but I'm going to focus for the moment on UAF question and appreciated the fact that you have 3 different companies doing 3 different types of service. ABM, and I'm familiar with your fans. On my walks, I often see them. I'm particularly thinking of classrooms. A lot of the classrooms at the university they're where people go to meet and they leave. They're not they're not the instructional center, educational center. The exception to that might be the labs, where people have experiments set up, their research in progress, things of that sort. There's a lot of living in those labs. Could you talk a little bit about the difference? Because I think they might be more comparable to our classrooms, how you deal with the differences in those settings, and that could be from university and also from ABM because you provide the service.
Absolutely. Like the school district, the university, of course, has a lot of different kinds of classrooms. We have about 55 what we call general use classrooms that might be used for a math class or an English class or psychology, what have you. We have a lot of research space on campus, and ABM does clean both general use classrooms and research space. There is a lot of space on campus that's not cleaned by the contractor, that's under research, that's cleaned by lab managers, lab users. And there's some spaces where, ABM will clean it, general cleaning of laboratory tops, benches, floors, but they don't touch equipment. That's in the contract. So, research is of course very important to us, and we're very clear in the scope of work for each of those spaces about what gets touched, what doesn't. ABM never touches any personal or university equipment, for example, never moves equipment off of tabletops, lab benches, that sort of thing. But they are responsible for floors and furnishings, stools, that sort of thing. I don't know if Vanessa has any additional insight into that. Pretty accurate. Yeah. And does that answer your question, sir?
It moves continue along. So let me ask from ABM in terms of how they handle that. And you mentioned 340 schools. I don't know how many districts that is, but so if you can clarify that. And along with the question to UAF is, I'm very concerned that our classrooms is, you need to adjust according to the activity that's going on there. But you still have to get it clean and make sure that it's there and set. If
The 300 and some odd that we named off are districts. They're not schools. That's districts. I mean, and a district can be anywhere between 6 schools and 50 some odd schools in some of our bigger districts. Okay, and then that's educational. That's the schools, and then you got your support buildings and all of that on top of that. Mr. Dorn, if we're asking kind of the differences between the higher ed and the K through 12, is that what you're asking, and how we look at it?
right, and from practical experience at UAF, you're doing labs that are instructional labs. They're also the research labs. They are overlaps, but they're classes that are going in. They're set up and can change according to what the project is. Classrooms change on a regular basis. They change seating. They change, activities,
yeah.
whatever.
They're similar and in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of ways they're different. Your students are coming and staying in the classroom for that period of time. In the higher ed, we have to bounce around between getting in there between the changes, very quick. The higher ed also has more public access to it that we have to keep up with as well. The overall productivity rates are slower in K through 12 than they are in the higher ed arena, and not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but we're working on some software and some processes that will affect that we can bill by usage. Where if a classroom's not being used, we can either shift that labor somewhere else to do something else, or we can rebate it. And once we get that fine-tuned, we got it in a couple of test spots right now. But that's more on the higher ed side because they don't utilize all of their facilities all the time. Stanford University, for instance, they have labs that they don't even want us anywhere close to because they're working on stuff, right? So we take them off of line and we put them back online, much like a high-rise office building has vacant space and then you put it back on. But y'all, as a general rule, K through 12 does not have those kind. They're more structured. We pretty much know when lunch periods are. We know when there's activities coming in and out. We know when there's lease activities going on in your schools, and we just do that appropriately.
I like to compare K through 12s to our work at airports, which I know is kind of a stretch, but you're sitting on the plane for hours, and then there's a rush to the washroom when you get off. And so a lot of our technology that we roll out to school districts originates with our airport division because they're used to working in quick turnarounds and rush of patrons or students in that example, right? So like Myron had mentioned, the quick turnaround and using technology to use dynamic cleaning, which is, where the schedule may change. So instead of I go to the admin offices and then I go to classroom A, there might be a study group that's in classroom A and they're running long. And so instead of skipping that, we need the dynamic schedule adjusting to say, hey, you're going to skip classroom A because there's a study group, go cleaning your route, and then it's going to readjust your to-do list to then match that study group is out and we can now hit classroom A. So some of that technology comes from our airport division because it's a very similar sitting for a long time and rush, and then sitting for a while and rush, right? Just like lunch breaks or bathroom breaks.
Can I do a follow-up?
A quick one. I've got a list of questions behind you.
Okay. All right. And I do want to say thank you to ABM. You're doing a balance piece. I mean, you're talking about your your company, but also sort of representing the big. As you were talking about that airport concentration, I'm just thinking in terms of, and it may be those parameters, but one of our concerns has been from the time school is out until the time school is over. The difference being that we have after-school activities, we have extracurriculars, parent things, a lot of different things that may go until 9 o'clock or so at night. So in terms of getting in, being available for some of the things, because we can't go 6 hours without any coverage. For a K-12, could you?
I think that's where a true partnership comes into play, right? We are not looking to be a vendor. We're not looking to come in for 6 months or a year and then leave. We're looking at this as a partnership where we need to be flexible in scheduling and communicate on our end, and mutually for your administration to communicate. And I think having local presence, knowing the ABM people here, right? Tay, Emily, the project manager that the administration staff is involved in that hiring process, is creating a partnership to say we're just as invested as you are in us. And that's where you're gonna find that flexibility then when it comes to cleaning schedules or adjustments that need to be made.
Mrs. Hardy.
So inside your slides, you mentioned when you do the transition, one of the first things you do is bargain with a union. So are any of your current contracts in Fairbanks or even Alaska currently bargained with a union?
I am, and I apologize my ignorance, I'm not aware of our bargaining in Alaska, and that's not to say that we are or aren't, that's just to say my ignorance. I originally started with the California market, which is known to be very union heavy, and so I can at least speak to the West region that we have school districts where we are and school districts where we're not. So depending on the district itself and how it was set up is how we adjust that. Myron, do you have anything to add to that?
Miss Maple.
I think this would be a question for you, for LJ. With your work with K-12 settings, is there any, I mean, I know that our people, if you're taking on our people, they're our people. We know that we want them around our kids. Do you have any specific protocol or training unique to your K-12 employees that, you know, because interaction with minors, of course, is so different than like being on UAF's campus?
We absolutely do, but I apologize. I'm not going to be the expert in that, Rain. I'm going to turn that over to the operations team who handles the training.
Yeah, we have several mandatory trainings. Our rule of thumb is, and it's hard, is we don't interact with any of the students, okay? We have a 9-minute video that everybody has to see on the respect of the students, and this comes from years of, you know, things coming up with all the cameras out there, all the videos, you know, when everybody only showing a snapshot of this or that. Our company policy is no interaction as far as touching, even limited visiting with the students. And I'll give you one example of where it did go wrong. It was a former in-house custodian who the principal asked to take the hoodies off and the caps of any of the kids that were in the lunchroom. Okay, this had been going on before we got there for years. It went on for a couple of years after we got there. We weren't aware of it as a management team, and he took one hood off, and by the time it got out into social media, he assaulted the child. So that's why we have that policy. And what you said about our people or your people, these custodians, regardless of who their paycheck comes from, feel like they're part of the district. Okay, and we want them to continue to play that part of the district. I know a lot of them, we don't make them wear our logoed shirts every day of the week, because a lot of times the schools have pride days, they have these days, they can wear the shirt for that elementary or wherever, because we want them integrated into y'all's operation.
Ms. Julian.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up to the recruitment question. I'm just getting stuck on that one because I'm looking at the numbers and assuming that you have an 80% come over rate from our staff, and I'm assuming that's an average. We're still looking at, if we're looking at about 70 positions, we're still looking at, and we have a 10% vacancy right now. And our vacancies are greatest in evening custodial, which is I know one of the reasons that administration is looking at this, because it's not just a cost savings, it's also a workforce issue that we have. You mentioned Flagstaff, Arizona. You can still drive there, and I've been there. This is very much an island, and I don't understand how, and maybe this is more of an Alaska-specific question, but how are you going to fill a 30% gap in a workforce that already has help wanted signs on every single door? I just don't see how that's squaring out.
So I can't answer all of those, and I feel bad I'm not giving you more concrete information, so I apologize for that. But I can tell you that we have no vacancies at UAF. And I can tell you that we have a plethora of applications that have already come in for the locations that we're doing a temporary contract with. So I don't know that I can give you concrete info other than that to say that we don't have any vacancies at Fairbanks, at UAF currently.
Follow up, Ms. Julian?
Yeah, just to follow up, help me understand why somebody would work for you versus work for us that has vacancies right now. We have 8 vacancies right now. You say you have 0. What are the benefits for somebody working for you?
That is a question that I can answer a little better. So a few of the reasons. One of the top reasons that we hear when we're working with K through 12s who are outsourcing is the career growth. A lot of times with school districts, you're going to have maybe a step or 2 up, meaning promotions, not raises. Thank you for clarifying that. But you might have a promotion or 2 that you can achieve and grow into. But the Fortune 500 company backing, publicly traded that ABM is, there is various career growth. And we're looking in this meeting specifically to the education market, which is what this team specializes in. However, we do have an airports division, we have a sports and entertainment division, we have a commercial real estate division. And so when I say career growth, it's not just within the school district, but there are multiple promotions that can be in the area with a different sector. So I know for myself specifically, I started at our commercial real estate division as a regional rep of 10 miles in LA, and then worked my way up, and now I'm in the education realm working for the entire West Coast. So there's different groups that we have that specialize in those sectors, and I think the career growth overall, when you combine that with the additional training and the management training that we have, might be just a little bit more open for growth than currently. So I think that plays a large role into when you're interviewing with a company and considering them is, hey, I can start there, but where can I go?
We've got Mr. Burgess and then Mrs. Hardy. Mr. Burgess, go ahead.
Thanks. I wanted to briefly circle back to the discussion about student contact, because I understand why a contractor like ABM would make the decision to say, don't interact with students anymore and you have to, or whatever. But that's not what our custodians do right now. Our custodians in our schools are an integral part of the school community. They do interact with students. They are educators in our buildings. And that includes oftentimes our night shift custodians because of after school events and things like that. So, you know, we've heard stories from custodial staff about, you know, fishing kids out of dumpsters, things like that, like helping out in ways that does require sometimes physical contact and things like that. So it's actually a concern of mine if it's a real hard and fast rule there to minimize interaction with students. Our custodial staff are often the face of our schools in one way or another to some of our students and families. So I guess that's more of a statement than a question, but I did want to kind of flag that it, you know, that doesn't seem to fit with our current situation.
Okay, next up, Mrs. Hardy.
And I have two, if you'll let me ask both of them.
Yes, ma'am.
If a contract that ABM has entered into costs you more than you had originally planned, what does ABM do in those situations?
Is this coming from like that I'm saying I'm gonna match the pay rates, and if it exceeds what I've got budgeted in there, what am I gonna do?
Yeah, if we're saying we're entering into a contract, and I mean, I've entered into contracts in my own, sometimes part of the contract is you renegotiate when things have turned out to be more expensive. What is your protocol for when contracts?
We won't be coming back for asking for more money unless there's a scope increase, okay? If we misestimated it, that's on us. Fortunately, I'm backed by some big money, you know, so I can make those statements like I made that I'll match everybody. I wouldn't have made them. I know I'm recorded. I know I'm going to do it. I don't even have to be recorded. I would do what I say I'm going to do. But we're not a bait and switch company where we bid low and we come in here, if that's what you're thinking. But if you change the scope and you go from, you know, 1 day a week trash to 5 day a week trash, yes, we're going to ask for money. If we missed it on our work loading, which is what we work from, you know, how many hours does it take to do a job? How many minutes does it take to do a task? We're not coming back, you know, for more money. That's on us.
I want to say I wasn't presuming anything that you're bait or switch. I think you guys are doing an admirable job in a very awkward position, and we really appreciate that.
I'm trying to be neutral, but I have to talk about the company somehow.
You are. You're doing a great
It's
job.
tough.
So you've talked about growth and that being a reason why people would choose to work for your company, but what about the growth potential for an employee that doesn't want to grow into management, that doesn't want to take on those leadership roles? What would be the wage growth for an employee that just wants to do their job well, you know, for 20 years?
This is going to come back to your other money question. If we're not getting more money from the district, we can't continually to give raises just off longevity. Okay. I mean, that's as plain as I can say it. You know, I've got revenues coming in, and I can only spend so much. If those revenues don't increase, the only other way we can do it is increase productivity and do it with less people, and then we can spread the money around. But there's not, without an automatic increase built into the contract or negotiated one every year, we can't give everybody an increase just for longevity.
Mrs. Julian and then Mr. Dorn.
I don't have another question. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Mr. Dorn.
And maybe wrapping it, I know the question was asked, how many people are in Fairbanks, but I don't think we got a number. If we could get that.
So currently at UAF we have over 60 employees and the residents in Anchorage. We have seasonal workers as well too, covering windows, paintings, operations, maintenance.
All right, with that, I'm interested in terms of what the turnover rate is, and if you could give us, you know, for your industry, and then what your experience has been, if you can share that, and particularly locally.
Yeah, so our turnover rate is between 25 and 28%. which is lower than the industry average, even during COVID. So we maintained our staff and made minor staffing adjustments during COVID, which was something that we're really proud about. But our turnover rate is lower than industry average.
I do one more? Okay. And this is kind of more to the administration, but based on the information that UAF and the Post shared, both entities have multiple inspectors, supervisors who walk around and stuff. My question is, do we have to increase our supervisory staff, or are we reducing our supervisory staff because there'll be a lot fewer people to supervise?
Our goal is to maintain our current custodial management team.
Follow up with just how many?
So it's a custodial manager and 2 custodial coordinators, so 3.
Dr. Minor?
And to follow up on that too, I think what's potentially different in our scenario is the day custodians would also serve as kind of that frontline communication tool between, our expectation and ABM. And so we have somebody on site in our schools every single day, seeing what's happening. And then I also appreciated the principal checklist and the way that they're able to communicate with the contractor too, because we know how important it is for principals to be comfortable within their building and have that constant communication. And then, as Ms. Carrion said, we would still maintain supervisory duties at the district level. I think partially because we want a really strong implementation. If we saw over time that staffing wasn't necessary, then we could look at potential cuts there. But we really want to make sure if we move in this direction that it's successful and that we've got the right personnel to make that a strong launch for the district.
Mrs. Hardy?
And this one's to administration. How many of our current custodians are on Tier 2 retirement system where this action could severely impact those employees' state retirement benefits if they're not able to secure future employment in a qualifying job?
Yeah, we'll need to find that information and provide it. Yeah.
If we could get it before the 17th, that would be awesome.
Is there any other questions from the board? Ms. Maple?
So currently, if somebody, I'm curious what the, sorry. As it stands now, our evening or shift custodians are able to fill in other places. If like a day custodian is, like somebody could come in and help with snow removal or something, and you referenced snow removal earlier. Are these, unique pieces, all things that are being considered individually? Or are these things where there would be, room, like Mr. Roper, where if a day custodian calls in this hypothetical scenario, that there would be coverage within the district for that, or is that part of a contract?
I would reach out to another day custodian to go and take care of the issue if it's not like a major snowstorm.
Other questions from the board? Mr. Dorn?
2 areas I'm interested in is the summer cleaning and maintenance. And what would be our expectation of doing that? And I noticed in some of the scope information that we have, there's a question of by special request. I'm assuming that's by additional cost to it. But
So I'd have to go back on our RFP, but I believe when we originally wrote the RFP, it was included annual cleaning, and there was just some other additional things that we don't typically do now that we would ask a contractor, and that would be additional. But our goal was the annual cleaning would be part of the RFP, and so you'll have a look on the daily, weekly, monthly, annually. We do have a lot of the annual checked off, and so that was built into the RFP.
so they would do all that summer cleaning that would
The
be
summer rehab.
contracted.
Correct.
Also a question in terms of the HR background checks that we've talked about. And what does that add? How does that impact HR? If the company's already doing those things, including fingerprinting, what's the exchange? So I'm just looking at ways, I mean, if we're saving, then we need to be saving across the board, or do we have to add on?
Do you want to answer that, Ms. McDaniel, or?
What the plan is that I understand that Ms. Proper and I have worked on over the last week is that the custodians would still go through our internal process of a background check through the True Hire program and also our fingerprinting requirement, and that cost is built into the RFP for reimbursement from the company that we select. So they still go through our background check process.
Follow up then, in terms of industry, would you accept our fingerprinting, or do you need to do separate, or what's?
I'll accept almost anything the client wants, but on the backgrounds, everywhere I work in the country, the results come back to the district regardless, okay? I mean, we don't get the results, and y'all make the call if that person's allowed in the district or not. We do our background, and we do the platinum level, the highest one we've got, to make sure we don't just send y'all a bunch of people to run through your system. Okay, so we're really confident by the time we get them to y'all. The fingerprinting is kind of the holy grail, because what the fingerprinting allows is, all a background check does is tell you what you've done in the past. The fingerprinting is live, and then you go get a DWI, you go, do something you're not supposed to do, then you all know about it. So the fingerprinting's the big key, because again, the background checks, it doesn't matter if we do them or y'all do them, they just tell you what was done in the past. It's not a predictor of what's in the future.
And that's the same process that we're currently using for other contracted services. And that, just like what he stated, that they have to be approved by the district before they can start providing services to us. So we have the ability to say that does not meet our standards. And so if something arises on a background check that brings concern to us, then we meet individually with that person to discuss it, to understand the circumstances, and then make a determination as to whether that person would be approved or not. We do that with our bus drivers, and there's some SPED contracted services with outsourced coaching and things of that sort. So that's a process that we already have in place.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Ms. Maple.
I'm curious if I assume you do, and I'd like to hear about them, any other relationships with school districts specifically that have something similar to the second proposal that came through, where you're providing part of the service and then the district's in-house folks are providing part of the service. And if you do, if you could share what that experience has been like.
Yeah, currently the biggest one that comes to mind right now is Paradise Valley and outside of Phoenix. They operate the day and we operate the night. And to the question that was earlier, if their day custodians aren't in, we supplement them with a pool of people that we already have. And that's sometimes as many as 15 to 20 people, but we have been there long enough, we got a track record so we can have that pool ready. We pay them a little bit more because they're assigned to a different school. It's not like they're going to the same place. They call in the morning and say, where do I go? And then we supplement that one for them. We do see it, I think it was Ms. Hardy that asked about the people at the tier 2. We see that situation where people the people that are close to retirement, I think that's what tier 2 is, the district wants to keep them on and help them get to retirement. And we can work it in 2 or 3 different ways of how we price that. Either y'all move them to somewhere and y'all just manage them, or we can manage them and then credit back, because y'all have to continue to pay them so they can get that. So we have different ways we can work that as well, you know, so we do see it. I mean, we got a lot of that shared out there. The biggest one is Paradise Value and pure volume.
Follow up, Ms. Maple?
So, you know, in like a job interview, get asked what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. So in these experiences, obviously it's not going to be, but what are the challenges that you have seen? I'm sure that that is followed by how you've solved those problems, but I'm interested in what's come up.
Obviously, if you have 100% control, it's better. In the nature of what we do for a living, and I'm sure y'all aren't any different than anybody else, the day people are pointing fingers at the night people are pointing fingers at the days. You know, the days are saying the nights aren't doing anything. We have to work harder. And it's just amplified when one's working for one company and one's working for another. So it's just amplified. We have it within our own people, but it's just amplified.
So we have Mr. Doran up next, and I just wanted to bring awareness to the time. It is after 7:30, and so I just wanted to make the board mindful of that so that we can have our guests leave at an appropriate hour. And with that, Mr. Doran, go ahead.
Thank you. So one of the questions I had was in terms of including minor maintenance, and I want to get a sense of how does that work between the district and a contractor. You know, but we've put in the RFP before, and I assume it would be in minor maintenance. What does that really mean, and how do we coordinate with that?
So it's just like it is today, you know, or the night custodians take care of the minor plumbing issues, replacing flushometers, vacuum breakers, leaky handles, patching and painting. It would be the same. It's just they're doing it at night versus us. And then there would be times that most of the time I think the day custodian would take care of most of the plumbing issues because that is part of their job description.
As a contractor, could you address dealing with minor maintenance? Schools?
There's a definition of minor maintenance, but you know, a lot of that does fall historically on the day custodian. Like if you're talking about hanging nameplates, changing light bulbs, you know, that's where we usually do that at, because that's where that direction is usually coming from the principal or their designate. But yes, we do that. But if you start talking, we don't do ballast. We don't, you know, a light bulb changing is one thing. Unclogging commodes, replacing plumbing fixtures, we don't do, you know, as a normal basis. But it's all comes down to pure volume and the need. You know, if it's one-offs here and there, that's fine. But if they're spending 20% of their time doing that, there's something being neglected. And I will ask the district, if you want us to do items A, B, and C, and we can't do the rest of the scope over here, okay?
I think just to clarify, it's whatever's in the scope of work of the RFP, right? That's what we're agreeing to. That's what we're pricing out. So if those items are included in the RFP, then that is our responsibility. If it's not included in the RFP, then it would not be included.
Okay, so my understanding then, like including minor maintenance, it includes minor maintenance, that would either need to be more specified, because that's what it was, that's what I saw.
I would think at least as a vendor who bid it, it would need to be specified, because again, there was two different scope of works in there. And I can't recall if they were in both or if it was just in one of the options. So whichever one, if you decide to move forward, is clarified, then that's what we would be bidding.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Julian.
Okay, thank you. This is to administration. Do you want me to ask that question now? Okay. I just want to clarify what I'm hearing. So Mr. DeGraw, this one's probably for you. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we have a scope of work, and I commend you on the scope of work. I've looked at it, it's extensive. Thank you. Thank you for that. Both of you. And over here too. I trust that the scope of work is extensive, and it was good to hear that as well from coming from our guests tonight. Our scope of work, to my understanding, is based off of what we had in 2010. Is that correct? Around that time?
Give or take, yes.
Okay, so we had a 32% increase in our workforce in 2010 than what we have now. Fewer vacancies. We also had 12-month contracts, so there's been some changes. What we are looking at right now, and I just want to be clear, is a $3 million savings on evening custodial, where we have our highest amount of vacancies. Right now, we're at about, it's a higher amount of vacancies overall than when we see in the day custodians. So we're looking at a $3 million savings going back to 2010 standards when we ourselves had a 32% increase, and potentially also addressing our vacancies. Am I just hearing all that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
One couple of anecdotal, I don't know if it's anecdotal or not. I've said it before, this is ABM's bread and butter. It's not the district's mission and top priority is to educate students. You know, facilities is a part of doing that. They probably have systems, process, training, equipment, probably. I mean, all of these investments create to higher levels of efficiencies. I also did some rough math. 8-hour regular workday with ABM. It's interesting to note 7.5-hour regular workday in our custodial ranks, and that is per our negotiated agreement with ESSA. So I was curious, unrelated, on a $25 average hourly salary, that's $3,200 annual increase in pay at that rate, at $25 an hour. So, but half an hour extra more each day would create more work being done.
Mr. Dorn?
And to make sure I understand, when you talk about equipment, you are talking about supplies also.
You define what supplies is everything we do to do our job. The equipment, when we're talking about, is usually a physical tool. So that's the auto scrubbers, that's the buffers, that's the vacuum cleaners. You know, one of those things we're real big on is battery operated versus corded equipment. For a lot of reasons, it does less damage to your facility as well.
And follow up then to administration, you know the question, because you said, well, it saves us equipment. Does that mean our equipment, because we are fully equipped, what happens to that equipment?
Well, I would have to check with Ms. Proper on this, but I'd venture to guess that it's of negligible value at this point, much of it, because we have done, as our budget constraints have increased and gone on year after year after year, what happens to the equipment replacement cycle? It, at this point, virtually is non-existent. And so actually a large upgrade for us when you're comparing reality of the age of the equipment we have now and ABM or another contractor's ability to bring in that new equipment. So night and day situation on age of the equipment and then also effectiveness of its application. So
2 questions I have related for administration related to acts on us, trade-offs. One of it is we have a number of people who have started in custodial staff who have moved into instructional positions. I watched one in operation today, doing a phenomenal job. So when we talk about, career growth, we have had a number of people, including a former board member who was in custodial and moved up or I shouldn't say moved up, moved into other aspects. So as a recruitment avenue for us in our district, what do we lose?
I don't know that we lose anything. I think the recruitment tool, in terms of it being a higher grade, makes it more attractive. And then all of the intangibles that you just said are still there from an employment perspective. And so I also think it strengthens our position for retention and promotion, in that having a partner in this work doesn't spread the job out so thin. What we've experienced in the last several years is our custodians that are in our building are doing amazing work, but they're oftentimes missing one team member, team members, 3 team members, and that's led to them becoming overwhelmed and overburdened at times. And so we're really hopeful that if we had a contractor as a partner, that wouldn't be happening as much, and then they would have that flexibility for promotions or different things that they might look to in the future. And so I really think it strengthens our position.
Thank you. And the related question to that is, one of our conversations on, I want to make sure that I'm not out of line, so other guys. One of the challenging pieces of health benefits is having smaller groups, and so risk is not spread so far. We would have 70 or so people removed. If we looked at that ramification, we're continuing to, and for a variety of reasons, because we've been cutting staff, our pool gets smaller and smaller, which can impact the cost of our benefits. So it kind of actually goes back to that benefits piece. How does it impact us?
Yeah, so, when you're looking at 70 positions compared to, we're looking at 1,500-ish general fund positions, and then probably another 200 grant-funded positions, 1,700. When you're looking at 70 compared to the 1,700 that are in the district, certainly it's 70 fewer, but my educated guess is that wouldn't materially change the numbers as far as risk and the actuarial calculations that go into, the size of our risk pool. So
I think it's also important to note what Mr. DeGraw started the evening out saying is with 87% of our budget in personnel, if it's not these individuals, then it's likely other jobs that would also lower that pool liability. And so, it might not be a one-to-one, but certainly if the board doesn't take this option, there would be cuts in other positions that would also kind of go down that same train of thinking.
I think related to your last question, your comment, and thank you for that feedback. And that's basically, I'm just trying to look at the different sides. That's why I'm raising them. We talked about benefits for different groups. We've often, and we again tonight in the presentation, compared this dollar amount with other dollar amounts, and particularly teaching positions or PTR, which can be different because we have other things we cut that don't factor into the PTR of teacher positions. It sounds very attractive, one against the other. And we've talked about, well, we might have to close another school if we don't do this, or, that type of thing. So my question is, and as you highlighted, we still have a $6 million deficit. The discussion in some ways is a red herring, though it's related. We might have to make other cuts if we don't make this one. But I want to be careful that the public doesn't think, oh, this is going to mean we don't increase PTR, or we don't, it might save a school, because those equivalencies are very different, and we're still going to cut. So.
The main reason for putting those in there is to give the board and the community a general awareness of what the massive deficit is that the district faces. And so even with these sizable challenges that we have and these hard decisions that the board might have to make, and we went to kind of the toughest decisions you would have to make with 5 schools and contracting custodial, that shows that you still have to cut $6 million as a board. And as you start going through that list, you've been on the board for a very long time, Mr. Doran, the types of things that we can cut, we've we've made all the easy decisions up until now. And so as we go down that list, it's very unlikely that we don't get to PTR. Like, we're going to have to make some incredibly difficult decisions in lots of different areas not to increase class sizes. And so what you're saying is right. It's not one or the other, but we just put it out there that if you don't take this option, it magnifies that issue that much more. And we can almost guarantee that you would get 2 class size increases, which is a cut to teachers when we're talking about staffing positions.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Seeing none. Fantastic. ABM, UAF, Colonel Cole and guests, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us and answer our questions. It has been very valuable and very appreciative. With that, is there any board comments or anything from anybody? Not seeing any. We are now adjourned.